Hey, Preston.
Hey, Margaret, how's it going?
It's good. We have my first guest on the podcast this week.
I know I'm excited. This is like Margaret's first brainchild episode,
Yes,
and she's really taking charge.
I am taking charge. I'm talking into the mic and I'm not pretending like I don't know how to open a podcast as I have done for the prior 10 episodes.
Well, I think it's getting easier,
It is getting
and
it's all an
and always with the
exposure.
help of a little icebreaker.
Yes. So, first let's introduce our guest. So, Amelia, do you want to introduce yourself or should I?
Ooh, I'm curious what you might say, actually.
Okay, well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to leave you to give your titles and your professional
Sure.
background. Um I met Amelia online, which is going to go into our icebreaker question of friends you've started being friends online or parasocial and became friends offline, off the apps in a less parasocial way. So that is going to be our icebreaker question. And part of it is because that is how Amelia and I became friends. I started following you, and I think I had like 1,000 followers or something, and you were posting as art therapy IRL. I was in my intern year of psych residency, and I've always been drawn abstractly to the idea of art therapy, but I never knew anyone who did it. In medical school, there's an opposite. There's never no. I there was maybe on child psych units there were, but like only in passing access to art therapists. And you were just so good at talking about what you were doing in a really coherent way, how it might help people, but also not talking about it in a way that made it feel like you were being coercive or like it was like, "This is the 5 things you have to do as an art therapist or else," or like, "This is what my patients must do." So I felt like it, like, really towed this line that I'd been interested in for a long time, and as a trainee who was trying to figure out, like, what do therapists do? But also this place online of, like, giving access to information around mental health without doing kind of, like, squirmy, ethical, questionable things.
Or just flagrant clickbait, which is what a lot of people fall into.
Yeah, yeah, like me. So, no,
In the Stregonona
it's right in our
catastrophe.
world. So you are an art therapist and you're also on here at with your new book, which I have gotten to read that we're gonna talk about. But I wonder if you wanna introduce yourself a little more, and I think you should. I always think people should use all the professional titles they have because when do we get to actually say them? And you worked hard for them, so I think you should.
Oh, thanks, Margaret. I'm resisting the urge to dive into so many of the little breadcrumbs you just left in that
Yeah.
intro, but I'll start with the businessy bits. I'm Amelia Knott. I'm a registered psychotherapist, art therapist, I guess author and content creator. I feel kind of funny when I say that and include that in the title or the description of who I am and what I do,
Mhm.
but that
What's
is
weird
a
about
good
being a
portion.
psychotherapist?
A lot.
Just kidding. Yeah, no, I feel similarly. Like I've always been kind of cagey around like the content creator influencer
Yeah.
term.
Until I invited you to your first panel talk, and I said, "You're an expert."
Yeah, and now
Well,
I'm
how did
like,
you introduce yourself
actually, I
then,
am an
though?
influencer. At which talk? I think I'm actually still beat around the bush a lot. I'm like, "Oh, I'm
Mm.
Preston and I, like, make videos." I think I even did that
Like,
today
today, right
without
now, yeah, like
yeah,
10
when I was
minutes ago?
first so, to the audience behind the scenes when I was introducing myself to Amelia, I was, like, still hesitant to use, like, the content creator term. It's interesting how we can be, like, averse to this title.
Which is so funny because, like, before we even set up this conversation, like, I followed you. I have a parasocial relationship with you, Preston, that precedes any of, us organizing this conversation.
Mm.
I don't know, I'm really curious about where that internal ick comes from. Maybe it's because one title feels so hard won or academic or I'm using air quotes, like, respectable in one way, and we
Mhm.
see another kind of work as not being worthy of the same kind of clout or respect. I don't know, there's a lot to untangle there that I don't agree with the way I just described that. I think, it's a really valid kind of work to communicate in this way. But
Yeah,
I share that, like, "Oh, I feel weird calling myself content creator."
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we treat it as a catch-all term, but content creator has been a eons old profession. Like, can you imagine calling Mark Twain like a content creator? Like he's functionally an author, right? But like at the time, the 1800s, he's like, yeah, I make content. "Oh, what kind of content are you, bro?" Like, more like literature and, like, stories and stuff. Oh, sick.
Well,
But
that's it.
but we
Book talk.
yeah, but we've adopted content to be any form of, like, artistic expression in the
Mhm.
media.
Yeah.
And then for some reason, we've made that the respect beholden to, like, the lowest common denominator, which can be people that make maybe content that we despise or would be embarrassed to be associated with. But it also
Yeah.
includes the most genuine content and anyone who's creating very thoughtful and and poignant things.
I mean, does that mean that people who publish in, like, Nature are just science content creators?
I mean,
I'm gonna get, like
I make science content published in Nature.
I'm a science influencer. Okay,
We need more
we're
of
gonna come
those.
back to that. That's actually part of what we're gonna talk about today with your book, which I want to show here, which is The Art of Thriving Online for anyone listening or watching this. This is one of my most excited books to get for, next year. I got it early from you. Um, and have been diving into it. But before we, I guess, go into that, I think a really great topical part of this icebreaker of kind of your guys' experiences with, like, either a friendship or something where, like, a relationship that was just sort of one way or didn't have a lot of sort of threads in between it that might make it quote unquote real, that became more real over time. You guys have both know, and I think
Mm.
Preston and I've talked about how we met. So I know mine with both of you. Um, but I'm curious what that brings up, or kind of community that became more real community. And Amelia, you talk about this in the book, that started out as just maybe observing someone's content they were creating.
Ooh, can I give an example that felt kind of bad for me or made me realize that
Yeah.
there was kind of a
Yeah.
chasm between the intimacy I was experiencing and what was actually real? I mean, I have other examples of meeting someone like you online and then developing a relationship and an intimacy that felt more and more like my in-person friendships. But I have this other memory of there's an artist and a writer that I've been a big fan of and followed since the early days of Instagram. And one
Mark
time I
Twain.
was
L- Love his stuff. Love his online course he sells.
Great content.
yeah, so I was on this road trip through California where this artist had a studio and had said online, like, my studio and shop is open by appointment. And so emailed, got in touch, stopped by, and then had this really intense moment of like standing in front of this person who I idolized in a lot of ways and feeling really uncomfortable. Like, yes, there had been this open invitation to come to this space that was in theory open to community, but I also felt like I was invading and kind of stepping into the personal space of someone who I felt a closeness with because I'd read their books and followed them for so many years. But then, like, I was this complete stranger. I felt really uncomfortable noticing just like the impact that that parasocial relationship had had on me and how it was really one sided.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Was
like
was that like your "Don't Meet Your Heroes" moment for you?
Totally. It was exactly like that.
Yeah. But it's interesting how, and maybe some things you're leaving unsaid, but, like, that there's an element of the, like, feeling, like, dislocated when you actually meet the real person, that the kind of, like, maybe, like, it's not uncanny valley, but kind of the sense of, like, this person coming off your screen and suddenly being real in a lot of ways that our, like, online projections didn't match it, and then that just being kind of disorienting. Um, and I could imagine that's why I won't meet Preston in real life. Just
Yeah,
kidding.
even though I try, she
You do
just
try. You do try.
yep, we
Um,
have to keep it parasocial.
but it's interesting, and you're saying, like, there's kind of just, like, it feeling off because it was someone different than what was maybe present in your parasocial attachment.
And it sounds like also there's this part of realizing from the expression on their face that they didn't see you with the same
Mm,
intimacy and knowledge that you could see
totally.
them.
Mm.
That was the
Like,
uncomfortable part of
"Oh, I'm a stranger to you."
feeling their not disinterest, but like, wow, this is really unbalanced.
Mm.
And or it didn't match the grandness I'd built in my head. And this is why I think something that's a part of my intake process with clinical clients is just naming that. Like if a client is coming to me having potentially formed a relationship with me already on social media, then we've got a name from the beginning like, hey, this might not actually align with the version of me that you've seen online. We get to co create a brand new kind of relationship here that really focuses on you. But there also might be some recalibrating of like what you expected this to be, and it might feel different. And that might feel weird too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to create pliable expectations from the beginning about you,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is unique. Because I think a lot of times people go in and they're only forming expectations from like the walk from the waiting room to the office as they get this impression of you. But very rarely will someone have this whole built up narrative of who their therapist is before they walk in. I have yet to have that with a patient. I'm usually recognized by like other therapists in the building.
Mhm.
So the other day, actually, someone's patient recognized me, but they were going to like an intake with somebody else. They were like, "Oh, that's Preston," and I was like, "Have a good therapy session." And my patient was like, "What was that about?" I was like, "Ah,
About it.
don't worry about it."
Don't worry about it. As an ask, don't ask.
That's really interesting, and I like that you name it. I feel
Mhm.
like it's so funny, like, it's such an easy cheat code that anytime you're worried about some kind of awkward or factor invading the therapeutic space, all you have to do is just name it, and then all of a sudden, it
Right?
becomes something to work through with them. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think one of the positive parts of it, though, and this is like the mixed bag that all of this is that we'll get into too, is I think all three of us, I to both of you, we've talked about kind of like how breaking down the expectation that folks rightfully and understandably have of the profession as a whole, um, and who is the person who's going to be sitting across from me, and do I want to talk to them about what's going on and what's hard, or maybe I feel shame about in my life. And I can imagine like there's the specific of who you are and the parasocial connection to that. Then there's also this broader narrative that maybe them coming to you is like, "Oh, no, I know that you made this joke that I didn't realize therapists could talk in that way," or like, "You identify like this, and I didn't think a therapist or a psychiatrist could be that."
Right. I think there's a much different level of alignment. I've noticed, say, moving from being in an agency and receiving referrals for clients to moving into private practice where virtually all my clients find me on social media. There's a huge difference between the kind of the buy-in. First of all, in me explaining the modality of art therapy, right? People are coming to work with me because they know something about art therapy or have just learned about it and are really interested and have a sense that it's the right modality for them versus me kind of needing to do some of that psychoeducation up front and
Yeah.
To sell
do a
it.
little bit to sell it, right?
Yeah.
And then also just in terms of personality and communication, like this is the positive side of the parasocial relationship. There's already some built-in trust if that person has followed you for a while, resonated with your political stance or just the way you communicate, right? I feel like the trust builds a little bit faster when that's how relationships start.
It's like you've pre-screened who could be a good candidate for you,
Mhm.
or at least from their perspective. Because I think a lot of therapeutic relationships are the first few sessions figuring out if this is a good fit or not.
Mhm.
Right, right.
And it sounds like at least these patients think that it's gonna be a good fit by the time they show up at your door.
Mhm, mhm,
It's really
exactly.
interesting.
I wonder too, to go to what you were saying of, like, something feeling more real versus not. I love this question, and anytime someone brings this up, I get annoying and talk about a lot, like, in my clinic and residency. And I wonder what you make before we dive a little bit more into the larger questions of the book itself, what makes a relationship more, like, real versus less real? And if we wanna take it out of, like, valid, like, maybe more whole, more connected, I think we can all agree you can have relationships in the material world that are less connected, right? That's not a thing that only exists online. But you mentioned, like, that there are people who you've met online, like, in our, like, friendship, um, that became more real. And I wonder for you how you would describe what makes something more or less real, less parasocial, more we're two people who know each other, not two images, projecting into each other.
Oh, I think that's such an important question, especially as our lives move increasingly online. And I say this in the book. the phrase "in real life" feels kind of problematic to me. I mean, and actually, like, my whole business name is kind of this tongue in cheek, like, what does "in real life" even mean in this day and age? I have trouble thinking about my real friends or my real life as being separate from my digital life because they're so entwined. And, like, I have experiences like meeting someone like you where perhaps for the first kind of months or weeks of back and forth, there was just like an affinity or like, oh, yeah, this person resonates or we're sharing some ideas. But then we had that Zoom call and it must have been 2 years ago, but
Yeah.
suddenly there was this like this reciprocity.
Mhm.
And like I still have this really embodied sense of like, wow, that person really, really got it. And I felt really seen.
Me too. Me too after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And reading your book, it was part of it, like, our conversation. I know you were thinking about it and starting to write at that time, and so it was really cool to see it pull out, but yeah, that sent I had the same experience as you of, like, now you're a person, but that was all still online. I mean, or it was faced or it was like a Zoom. Um, yeah, and so there's something about I don't know if there's good words for
It
this.
seems like a criticism on the medium through which we
Mm,
communicate as to like delineating real versus fake, or that's how at least I think people casually do it. These are my virtual friends, my real friends.
mhm,
But you can have a more genuine emotional connection with a virtual person than you do with a real,
yeah.
quote unquote, real proximity friend. This is a dumb, not necessarily a dumb quote, but I was watching the show Industry the other day, and it's like the British Succession. Anyways, this guy's sitting in an elevator and he's talking to someone about their family, and he said, "There's honestly not a lonelier place than
Mm,
being in the room with people who are supposed to love you or supposed to know who you are."
mm,
And I think about that, like, too, like, how fake are these relationships of people who are my family or, like, live in the room next to me, yet my real relationship is ones and zeros on a screen.
hmm, hmm. Yeah, it makes me think of, like, all the spaces in between, like an influencer you follow who you've never had a one-on-one conversation with and who is like maybe does a lot of it seems like a less vulnerable account, whatever that means, which you also talk about in the book, which I love. But to me having a FaceTime with my like nephews who are 1.5-year old while I cook dinner and they eat dinner and they like practice the newest words they've learned how to say, like that feels real like this delineation of real, not real is not quite complex enough, and I think we all think all 3 of us think that, but clinically and kind of the, like, talking points, and Amelia and I have talked about this before around, like, how we help people with, like, their screen time and their understanding of themselves in social media is often, especially when we're talking about, like, kids, young adults, just like, "It's bad, just get out in the real world and off your phones," and, like, you know,
Mhm.
shakes fist at cloud, but it's a really complex question of what is real, what is not real, and what's meaningful to each person or even patient or client we see.
And I think it can be minimizing to tell somebody that, hey, this portion of your life that maybe I don't have or is not somewhere I spend my energy isn't real or legitimate, right? Like, let's imagine you're a trans teenager somewhere in the country where it's not safe to be honest with your family. It's not safe to be honest with teachers, but Reddit and TikTok are places where you can be connected with other people or start to have those conversations or even just hear other people sharing their life experience. Those relationships might feel more real than who you have to mask as or show up as in in your daily in-person life. It would be so invalidating to tell that
Mhm.
person who isn't
That's
able to
fake.
get, yeah, that's fake, or
Yeah.
that
Uh-huh.
the way you're trying to get the need of belonging met, which is a
Mhm.
basic need, isn't legitimate.
Uh-huh.
So turn to this community or turn to this place that doesn't accept you, that isn't safe for you, right?
On the basis that it has proximity to you.
Exactly.
And nothing else. It makes me think of this story I saw. There's this kid who he was disabled and died of cancer, and his parents found that he actually had this blossoming Minecraft or not Minecraft, World of Warcraft community. And
Mhm.
so they only found out about this because after he had passed, they received like hundreds of emails from beloved players that like cherished him as a member of their virtual community, but he had real impacts on their lives and hope for them to reach out. So they saw their son as having this like isolated, detached life, and then found out that he was a beloved member of this rich community that was all took place online.
I think a big book a lot of people are talking about right now is Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which is sort of another one of these books of like how social media is like the bane of existence and anxiety, blah, 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 and how it makes them less sociable. But then there's all of these situations where it's like you're not comparing, it's comparing like a child who feels safe and has all these resources. And even in that case, but it's like, okay, if a child was gonna be home in their bedroom at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night in the '90s versus now, is that like and now they can text their friends at 9 p.m., like, that's just treated all as one thing as though, like, people would be out socializing 24/7 if it weren't for these phones, but it's like, well, what if it's just, like, a boring weekday night and you would've just been, like, playing Nintendo? Like, is it couldn't you be working on just a different language of social skills at that point?
I mean, it's also that teens aren't preparing to enter a world where that is the
Right,
tool that mediates
right.
our relationships, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen a photo of like a subway car in like the 1910s and everyone's just reading the newspaper, not a single person's talking to each other?
Mhm.
And but then you see the same thing today where people are on their phones and they're like shaking their fists. They're like, ah, no one interacts like they used to. And you're like, dude, 100 years ago, people were just as stoic. They were just reading something else.
Yeah, like, people don't give each other the plague like they used to. Well, that's
Yeah.
not true.
No
Um,
one's ever wanted to be social in their morning commute. That's just
Yeah, that's just
universal.
no one's
it's
wanted
it's
that.
always been a thing, like, even if it was, like, back on, like, the boat in Roman times, I'd probably just be, like, reading the bark on the back of the tree, like, "Oh, like, look at that, I just don't wanna make small talk right now."
Bold to assume you'd be in a social class that knew how to read. Very
Yeah,
bold. Very bold.
yeah, I would just be twiddling my thumbs with the
Yeah.
twine of the rope or something.
Yeah. Well, okay, there's 1,000 things we could talk about, and this is very reminiscent precedent of me and Amelia's Zoom conversation where I think we just talked for 2 hours, like, pinging back and forth. I guess to ground us a little bit, I would love to ask you kind of how did the book come about? Again, the book being The Art of Thriving Online, creative exercises to help you stay grounded and feel joy in the world of social media. And I say that not just to put the name out there, but because I love the title and the subtext.
Mhm.
Um, how did the book come about? And, how would you describe the book to someone who you felt like was struggling with how to change their relationship to their screen use, especially right now? I know you're in Canada. I'm in Boston. Preston is in Texas. God bless him. But winter, right? Like I think this is a time, and you and I, yeah, I've been writing a lot about this online too. Is a time where I think a lot of people are like, I don't want to be on my phone all the time, but it's also cold and dark outside, and um, yeah, just how the book came about and how you would recommend it, or what you would say to someone who might be wanting this. Loki, I need your book to fix my relationship with my phone. Thank you.
I need to fix my relationship, but no, I think you're spot on. And truthfully, if I could be cheeky about it, it's because I was getting so frustrated reading self-help books
Mhm.
by tech bros who'd like already made their millions developing the apps I was now addicted to and had the gall to say, oh, you just got to have better willpower. And
You just knock
here's
it off.
It's your fault. You ever consider that it's
exactly.
your fault?
Have you
"Oh,
thought about
thanks, bro.
trying
That'll be
ashwagandha?
$15, please."
You
But
thought of
and
looking at this directly into the sun at 5:30 AM?
like if someone tells me to habit stack one more time, it's just not going to work for me. And
Or
like
this weird, like, ritualistic imitation where they're like, "Jeff Bezos takes 2 poops before 7:30 AM. I'm on my way to be the next billionaire." You're like, they may not be related.
Yeah, you just have to say it in the right tone, there's, like, definitely a rhythm and intonation that is the, like, "This CEO gets up at 3 AM every day. Well, your lazy ass, like, if
You
you cared about your life."
you won't believe what 40% of high school dropouts do. It's not become CEOs, but 40% of CEOs are high school dropouts.
But Michael
but it's
Jordan
that
didn't make
like
the basketball
self-help
team.
rhetoric, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's so frustrating. And I think it was mostly born out of, yeah, this frustration with the format that so many self-help books take, where it's like, here's a blog post that could have stayed
Could
a
be
blog
just a blog
post.
post. To
I
quote,
mean,
"If books could kill."
exactly. And then there's this like very regimented 10-step plan for how you'll fix yourself. And oh my goodness, if you can't follow the plan, then it was your fault all along. And I don't buy it. I mean, as a neurodivergent person, consistency has never been a gift of mine, right? I'm good at developing a strategy, but sticking to it is a whole other question. And when it came to like reckoning with feeling like my own relationship with social media was problematic, the typical self-help playbook wasn't doing anything for me and felt really frustrating to have these cycles of, okay, I'm going to block myself out of social media until 9 a.m. every day. And then I'm going to get up and do the Pilates and do the this or like,
I'm gonna winter arc so hard.
I've felt that strategy too, and it feels like the equivalent of when you say to someone like, "Hey, I didn't like that comment you made," and you're like, "I guess I'll never talk." You know,
Whoa.
it's like, "Oh, I don't like how I scroll too much in the evening. Guess I'll never use my phone ever again."
Yeah. I feel like that's the other thing, and what I like in your book a lot is which makes sense given the work you do, a lot of times there's such a negative, like, pathologizing of the emotions that lead someone to be liable,
mm,
to be kind of caught up in the attention economy that is engineered to keep people caught. It's kind of like how with alcohol, we used to kind of act like, "Oh, alcohol is fine for everyone. You just have a particularly messed up moral compass or genetics or something's broken about you." And we used to talk about substance. I mean, some people still do talk about substance that way, but rather than, oh, this is maybe like an addictive thing. And here's what it's drawing
yes,
on. And
yes,
here's where it's useful, though, similar to maybe things like not everyone, I'm not going to go into this metaphor ends there, but like the the books are always like, "Look at how unproductive you are because of this. If you just would work harder like this me and my, 5 engineering bros, then you wouldn't have this, like, flaw in you, this fatal flaw that makes you bad and not productive."
and here's this new app that will solve the problem,
Yeah,
right?
here's a new app. Here's my protocol for it. Uh
It's an approach of problems of the soul with an engineering mindset, I
Ooh,
think.
I
Ooh,
like that.
And like they're engineers, so they're gonna solve it with a 10-step plan, but like, these
Yeah.
these are issues with the psyche.
Yeah.
mm. Yeah, wow, that's exactly it, and I think because I'm an art therapist and an
Mhm.
artist first, I know of no better way to grapple with something challenging than to take it out of the realm of language and into a space where I don't need to use the cognitive or analytical side of my brain. Like, if something is challenging to put into words or challenging to make sense of, then I wanna use a medium that is more expansive than language to sort out how I'm feeling, not
That's
necessarily
not
fix
burdened by
myself.
words.
Right, I mean, words are brilliant. I love words, I'm a writer, and also, I think so many of us run into this trap where we know what we know, and it's hard to discover something new about ourselves when we're using, yeah, a tool that has very pointed meaning. And, the philosophy of art therapy is that you kind of step out of that side of your brain and into something expressive, something that has the capacity to surprise you and help you perhaps discover something new about yourself or your experience. So I wanted to make a resource that, first of all, introduced some of that philosophy of art therapy, and then tried to see if we could use that to also hold this relationship with technology that, I mean, I haven't really found other resources that aren't just the 10-step plan for fixing your discipline. I think this conversation is so much more complicated than willpower. It's about, I mean, how capitalism works. It's about the tech industry and the power, living in Silicon Valley. It's about the fact that the very nature of what it means to be real, as we were saying before, is changing before our eyes. So, again, something that is tangible, like drawing, like painting, like collaging, I think can bring us back into the here and now to grapple with something in a different way and make sense of it in a different way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I
It's
think
really fascinating to me that we have this industry that's pretty much been curated or programmed to separate us from our attention
Mhm.
in amazing way, like ways that we didn't think technology could do. Is it's
mm,
perceiving your attention and finding ways to make you spend longer on your phone. And then
mhm,
the recommended solution to that is to just fix your willpower when you have
Yes.
like everything in the marketplace is being pinned against you.
mhm.
So I've similarly found that frustration.
I think
And go
this
ahead, Martin.
part of this is how I think like Amelia and I originally connected, as both know. My TikTok name is Bad Art Every Day, but there was definitely like a kindred kind of sense of I'm obviously not an art therapist, but like how this creativity and kind of moving outside of how we usually relate can be something really powerful and good for people and I think meaningful. And what you're saying, right? Like not just in your training as an art therapist, but also like you're saying in the form of this book, that it's a workbook and it's not just a workbook that's like write down your 5 bad thoughts about your screen use, right? It's like
Yeah.
very interactive, very like pick it up. I like that there's like the first page is like tear this page out so you're not afraid of messing up this book. I love that. Or mess up this page, whatever. That the form of the antidote matters in the same way that the form of the problem takes. So that, like,
Mhm.
if we have a problem where we're sort of pulling away from our bodies or avoiding sensations in our bodies, which I think is a core issue actually present in some people's screen use, like, it's engineered to do that. And that colludes with our desire to understandably move away from anxiety, pain, uncertainty, difficult, like really hard things happening in the world. Um, but that separates from our emotions. It increases our anxiety because it's just like unprocessed emotions. And so that form of disembodied kind of distraction, I think it makes so much sense that the antidote would be reconnecting, slowing down, and having it be embodied in a way that is not only talking, but is using your hands, is noticing the smell of paint, is kind of this mindful reintegration of these parts. So I like love the form of this as well. It'll take longer for people. That's like, I think the other thing is like, even me looking at it, I was like, oh, this is going to mean I can't just read this and then move on to the next thing. But that's why a lot of the other books I've read haven't worked because they didn't ask anything of me. I just tried to absorb a strategy, right? Whereas your book asks something of its reader, which I think is why it makes me hopeful.
And I think, I mean, hopefully sets people up to discover something really useful. I think the other thing to add on to what you're saying is we use this tool every day that also separates us from our ability to choose and our autonomy and shapes the way we think and what we perceive to be as true. There's something really important and empowering about not just being told what the solution could be, but discovering what your personal definition of wellness could mean. I can't tell somebody what that is. I have my own definition, but it's so much more impactful for someone to author their own definition of well-being than it is to be told what it is or what it should look like. Like I think about something a clinical supervisor of mine said that yeah, it's just stayed with me through my entire practice and that's don't steal the revelations. Right? It can be tempting to jump in and offer an insight or say, "Ooh, I'm seeing this," or to offer and jump ahead of what someone might be working out in their brain. But it's so much more impactful when someone has that light bulb moment or notices something about the way they're drawing something or a theme that's coming through. When it comes from your own hand, your own mind, it's so much more likely to stick and feel like something that wasn't just a Band-Aid solution on a problem.
It is so much harder to guide someone to that conclusion than it is to just try to say it too. I
Right.
found like I'll be frustrated in like how to word something or how to nudge someone along to reset. And for me, the reflexes, or it's easier on my end as a therapist to
Mm.
just say like, "Oh, this is what I'm seeing."
Mhm. Yeah. I'm in a psychoanalytic fellowship right now, which I think in modern therapy, I actually think psychoanalysis has become radical again and that there's more room for exploration. And in some ways, I think actually embodiment, because it's like, come in the room. I'm not going to teach you any like tools or tricks or anything, right? I'm going to, in some ways, similar to art therapy, create a space where we're going to explore something, but then I don't have any idea in mind of where we need to go next. And then in
Mhm.
authentically creating something together that when we really connect with the salient kind of emotion underneath, creates that interpersonal field and allows for exploration, which I think art therapy can give people who struggle with that for a number of reasons a way to have some of that exploration in a way that feels safer if interpersonally that doesn't feel
Yes.
possible yet.
Oh my gosh, like, you're describing why art therapy can be valuable, like, so succinctly. And I think, I mean, in this day and age, if you're a person on social media, then there's no shortage of hacks and tricks, right? You've probably seen
Yeah.
every one the algorithm has to
Girl, I've
offer,
tried some of them myself.
right? And like what is invaluable, I mean, speaking of real versus not real, is a therapeutic relationship that isn't driven by an outcome that somebody else has prescribed for you. And in art therapy, if like approaching that relationship is intense, as it often is for a lot of reasons, whether it's our trauma background or neurodivergence,
Mhm,
like there's this third presence. And there's this concept in art therapy where instead of it being therapist client, it's triangulated. It's therapist
mhm,
client, and then the artwork is this third presence.
yeah,
So
Mm,
in moments where it's really intense to be sitting in, whatever memory was just shared or whatever question was
mhm,
just asked, we turn back to the art and see what it has to say. And oftentimes that's where the surprise and that's where like the unconscious comes through.
mhm,
And I can't
mhm,
control where it goes. I can't even interpret the art, right?
mhm,
What
mhm.
something means, not for me to say as a therapist, it's for the artist.
Yeah. There was an article I recently read, one of the old Winnicott papers that was like, I shudder to think of how many patients I have, like, gotten in the way of because I had to interpret that, like, and it's very humbling and also very, very exciting to kind of read that, and he wrote that, 20, 30 years into his career, I think, but exactly what you're saying of I think it makes the job even more interesting for us also that and it makes us hold less of that emotional burden if it becomes like we truly are co-creating. I have a set of skills to help facilitate the space, but we're going somewhere together that neither of us really knows. And in that, we're both a little bit vulnerable.
And
Um,
I think this is a giant misconception about art therapy is that the therapist is sitting there with their clipboard and sees the house like, ooh, 4 windows. Oof. What
just as I
Curtains are
nation-state
blue.
llamas,
suspected.
right? I have no idea what something means, what a color means, what a symbol means. And in fact, like I'll go as far to not even say something about the dog if the person hasn't identified it as a dog, right?
Mhm,
That's,
mhm,
I think, a really important way of sharing the power and being truly client centered in art therapy is that the person knows that any meaning, any metaphor is coming from them. There's no like secret bank of symbols and meaning
Yeah.
hidden in the back of my head.
yeah, and there's a freedom to that, I think. Um, this I think we're at the point where we need to take a little bit of a break. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about something that I've wanted to talk about both of you together in the same virtual room, which is the ethics of being a therapist online, but also the personal part of being someone who is putting yourself online and therefore the gaze that you start putting on yourself and your life as a performance. So we will talk about that when we're back. Do 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 do.
Boop,
Do,
boop,
Okay.
do,
boo, doo,
do,
doo,
do.
boo.
All right. So now that we're back, I think something I would love to explore with both of you guys is I think let's actually start with this idea. And I'm curious for both of you because you're both forward facing. And I think you both have had a larger following than I've experienced for like a while now over the last couple of years. And you both talk to the camera, which I don't. And so I just wonder if you might speak to, and Amelia, you write about this in the book, how when you're offline, how the gaze of the camera or how you frame your life, what your experience has been, and Preston, your experience with this. of times maybe where it felt like your online life got in the way of your real life or was crossing boundaries you didn't want it to anymore?
Mm. I mean, maybe I'm curious to hear from Preston first because you have the biggest following about out of all of us. Like, what has it been like for you, the differentiation between your online life and offline life as more and more eyeballs are on you on a
Mhm.
daily basis?
So, there was this one time I was going to see a consult in the ED, and I'm like kind of just like meandering through the emergency department as one does. And I think I walked past someone who recognized me. And as I go over into this like final pod, they followed me for like 100 meters or so. They're just kind of like, is that him? And then they kind of walked down the hallway. And then they rounded the corner and said, "Hey, are you that guy from TikTok?" And I was like, uh, yeah. And he was like, "Oh, that's so cool." And then he like turned to the nurses station, was like, "This is that guy who's famous on TikTok." And then a few of the nurses recognized me, and then the ones who didn't, they all started like pulling out their phones. And it kind of turned into this like whole gaggle, and like people were asking questions from different directions. And I remember getting like very uncomfortable and like going from like being this like quiet consultant who was just gonna go like see my patient and leave to now like the center of attention at like 2 in the morning on like kind of just like a long day. And I hated it. Like, I just said, like I remember, like, smiling and be like, "I'm just gonna go see this patient now," and then I kinda, like, almost, like, ran away and then went to go, like, hide in the patient room, and luckily, I can have an excuse to have a long interview with someone, and I remember hearing one of them say, like, "Oh, you scared him away," or all these things, and I like, had pictured this moment happening, like, when people like, a lot of people recognize me in, like, one setting, but didn't think about it, like impeding my desire to, like, go see a patient or to, like, dread going into a certain place, which was kind of strange, and I guess it really, like, solidified for me that, like, what I do is real, and I never thought it wasn't real, but like we were talking about before, it was like, I have my virtual setting and all the things I do on my phone, and then I go back to real life, and they kinda interchange, and then here I had this moment where they, like, totally intersected, and then my desire to do my job was now, like, getting affected by it. So, I think that was probably the most, like, negative scenario. All the other times I've been recognized have been pretty positive, except for one, where it and this wasn't necessarily negative, but it was, like, a reminder of how vulnerable I am online reflects in vulnerability in real life, I guess. So, one time I was like on an elevator at like 5 in the morning and someone like turns to me, and this is usually how it goes. They're like, "Do I know you from somewhere? Like, do I recognize you?" And then I'm like, I just say like, "I have a pretty generic face," which I do. Like even in med school, like they
Do
thought
you?
like I looked like an anesthesiologist, so I get thanked for great anesthesia work all the time. So usually that line works okay, but then they were like, "Oh no, you're that guy from online." And then the next thing out of her mouth was, "You take antidepressants." And I was like, "Alright." Like, out of all of the videos I made, like, out of all the content I made, like, why'd you have to go and bring that up?
You're
And
like, "I
then
got those Siggy caps, baby."
and then she just left the elevator, and I was like, "Well," like, I kinda I had this moment with myself, I was like, "Well, Preston, like, you told the camera, like, what do you expect? Like, what did you expect? People to not see that?" You know? And I think it was just, like, very much thrown in my face, like, "Hey, if you're vulnerable, it's gonna, like, come back to you," and, like, those are all still things that exist, and I knew it in the moment. And I think I was trying to prepare myself for it, but I don't think anything really prepares you for, like, that kinda interaction, I guess.
No, when you realize that what feels safe or comfortable or like an empowering kind of vulnerability online has a different impact when someone views it through a screen who maybe doesn't know you versus, oh, this person is walking into my care, or this is my colleague who now knows what kinds of medications I'm on or whatever
Mhm.
it is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the experience I've had that really felt like the clashing of worlds. I've never been recognized. My platform's not that big. And I do talk with clients about the fact that, like, if you follow me online, you might see things that wouldn't normally come up in a session. And that can feel weird, right? You might learn things about me or my personal life that you wouldn't normally learn about a therapist. And I mean, along with that, I also try and ask myself the question, is this piece of information I'm sharing likely to cause transference in a negative way in my client relationships, which is interesting to think about my caseload versus my audience, right? I mean, anyways, that I digress, but I've tried to be really careful with only showing parts of my personal life that feel related to the field of art therapy or kind of in line with my work. And there was one time I shared a video about some kind of collaborative art project I was making with my friends at my engagement party. And I remember a little while later, a client mentioned having seen it and the impact that it had. And I thought, oh my gosh, I thought I was being so careful. Like I thought I was doing a really good job of keeping those realms separate. And it's still coming into the therapy room. So that it's a hard place to know because social media, especially if we're facing the camera, asks us to commodify like every minute part of our lifestyle. I mean, I think women face this disproportionately as well. Like you can't post a video about anything without someone wanting to know what, the brand of lip gloss you just put on is or, where you got your glasses from,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But it's tough to show up on a space where there's an expectation that your vulnerability is your social currency. Yeah, it's a thing that I am constantly grappling with, and I think most of us in health professions haven't had training from people who had to navigate that themselves. We're as this generation of online therapists and clinicians needing to invent the rules as we go and figure out what
Hmm.
digital ethics means in this day and age.
Mhm. And also, it affects your relationship with vulnerability,
Hmm.
Oh yeah.
commodifying it because now it's like when you have a good reflective vulnerable
Mm.
thought, you're like, oh, I could sell this.
Mm.
Yes.
Huh.
Not necessarily
No.
consciously, but you're like, this is a good chance for me to be vulnerable in front of the camera. And I think like I've definitely had moments where I have things like that. I'm like, I just don't want to I don't want to share this. And like I know it's something that like I've been vulnerable about before, like would be good content, but it doesn't feel right. And then I almost like want to reclaim that like there are some parts of like this character that is present that I don't want to display.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that's really important. Like there's a part in the book about deliberately not telling my own trauma story online. And it's for exactly the reasons you say, Preston. Like I'm first of all afraid to be pigeonholed into the story of, oh, the girl that bad thing happened to, right? Like I'm terrified of, being recognized in person and someone saying, oh, that thing that happened to you as a kid. Like I don't want to have that conversation with a stranger. Right? Or have people come to expect only content or storytelling that relies on me reliving a certain trauma that I've experienced.
Well, it's
Yeah.
also the like what goes viral and then what your audience expects from you. Which is I I think a part of this sort of, expectations of the larger culture, but also that people follow, or if someone does a series that is like at a certain point where this particular subset of your life feels possible to share and it feels like good vulnerability, and then things change or you don't want to keep sharing in that way or that part is over. But then these people followed you from these viral videos that I think often the like ones that elicit emotion go viral. And then they say, "What do you No, I want more of this." And they say, "I want more of you." But yeah, there becomes
But
this
me's
like,
not for sale.
yeah, not like, but
Mhm.
who's paying? No, yeah, yeah. And I think both of for what you guys both post, I feel like before I knew either of you outside of, in a one-to-one way, your vulnerability was the thing. And I think humor is also vulnerable, right? Like kind of sharing like these like imperfections as well as your story was, I think, what made me even connect with both of you in the beginning, right? And but then the question of like how do people stop asking and how do you put up a wall, especially as it becomes your job in some way, right? Like I know Amelia, you're more engaged in this and that you do like the groups and things like that. Preston and I are both trainees, whether we want to be or not. And our job is kind of set, but it's like how much do you exchange of yourself once your work gets involved with how you get, and maybe this is less for you at this point, Amelia, but like referrals. I know one of the things in your ethics workshop that you talked about a year ago or whatever, I think it was like a year ago, right? Maybe. Um, a
Yeah, year or 2. Mhm.
question people were asking you about was kind of marketing their private practice. Um, and that gets into a whole different kind of set of things of like, if the clients you're attracting come from who you are online and your vulnerability, your personality, how do you stop doing that if it's really your livelihood?
Really, like, I think I had the unfortunate privilege is a weird word to use, of kind of learning this lesson the hard way. I mean, and this is pre-social media, but, like, the trauma I was talking about before was very publicized. Luckily, before, so much of it would have been on the internet, but as a child, my trauma story was very public in the news. So I think I had this early experience of being known for something that had happened to me and being, yeah, kind of pigeonholed as brave or resilient in this way. And also within that, because I was an adolescent, right, learned that, okay, my worthiness comes from this resilience or having experienced or navigated this thing. And it was really hard to untangle that and find a different source of validation and worthiness, which is why kind of in this era of my life, it's felt so important that I'm known for art therapy or something that isn't something that happened to me that I had no control over. But, coming back to what you said about private practice and marketing, this question came up for me because in grad school, I really thought, okay, grief and loss is the work I want to do. It's what I'm familiar with. It's a conversation that I'm really captivated by. And then moving into private practice had this revelation of like, oh, actually, if I start telling my grief and trauma story, I'm only going to be talking with clients about their grief and trauma. I don't know if that's sustainable for me. I don't know if that's the kind of work I want to do and only do.
Mm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah. I wonder, I wonder how you think about this for, the average sort of person or client you're seeing or someone who's not in the social media eye, like they're not a content creator, they're not creating, but they are shaped by this, like they think it's impacting their mental health in terms of like comparison or their relationship of like how things become something they can commodify, even if it's just with sharing with their friends. Because I think that vision isn't just happening to people whose job it is. I think there's a higher intensity, but
Hmm.
I think it also happens with like my young adult patients and my like adolescent patients and even my like postpartum patients who then start comparing themselves and what life should look like.
Right. I think even if, we're not somebody who has our livelihood depend on our online presence, there still becomes this like self editing and experiencing the moments of your life through the gaze of the internet, like thinking about the caption before, as you're taking the photo of whatever is happening, right? Like curating your life or living it in this disembodied way, kind of through the anticipated lens of how somebody else
Hmm.
would view it and interact with it, whether it's someone you know or someone you don't know.
I think for me, it comes to thinking about the goal or what you're hoping to achieve. So if you're living your life through the anticipated lens of the internet, that goal may be to produce entertaining content or to resonate with people. But if your goal is to find validation or to find someone who you connect with, is that what your vulnerability serves to do? So like in an interpersonal interaction, like me being vulnerable may be like a plea for intimacy, whereas my vulnerability may be a way to normalize online, but it also could be a way to like advertise for myself as like my authenticity or something like that. So personally, when I'm trying to figure out like, do I disclose this piece of information or do I talk about myself? Like, what what do I accomplish? Like, what is like? Can I take a step back? What is my goal, and how does this move me either closer towards or farther away from my goal. And so I I resonate a lot with this fear of, or not necessarily a fear, but being cognizant of the label that I'm going to get with everything I put out, like how you're describing Amelia. How is this going to like pin me down as how I'm viewed? And also this other part is, how do I continue on my journey of where I want to go?
Yes. Yeah. And
And
just to
and
hold the other side of it too, like people's vulnerability online is life saving, right? The universality that can exist in a space like TikTok might not compare to what is actually happening in your in-person community, right? Had it not been for the vulnerability of strangers on the internet, a lot of things in my life I think would feel unacceptable or wrong or abnormal. So there's this balance, and there's no right way to, I think,
mhm,
find or make rules about it. I think we just have to have a continual practice of checking in with ourselves about what feels too exposing. Where is the motivation coming from, right? Is it validation or connection?
yeah.
Not that that's a tidy
Or
thing that
just
we can.
self-interest, and also
Yeah.
not that they can be mutually exclusive. There was a I don't know if you listen to The Daily, but they covered, breast reductions a few days ago. Very, very interesting episode. I'd recommend it. But basically, there's been an increase in breast reductions, and it's being driven by millennial women, and they're kind of investigating why. And one of the like strong reasons or things that are like changing in this environment of like shame and beauty and how it's approached as society is people taking to TikTok to
Mm.
normalize and talk about their procedures. And people are like almost like documenting like every step of the process and allowing other people to see their journey. And so and I think the same exists for like all cosmetic procedures or a lot of them. Like
Ah.
I know hair transplants is huge right now. Like the amount of like guys that will like fly to Turkey or something and then they'll like do their whole like document like every little like guys who would never do like beauty care are like, here's all like how my hair transplant went and every little thing about it. And so I guess even for people who are trying to outside of the like therapist space or advice space and any kind of like cosmetic procedure or like challenging part of our life, shedding that spotlight on it or normalizing it serves a purpose for them.
Well, it's interesting to even think I didn't listen to the episode, but I listened to someone talk about it, so this is all secondary, but this issue of, like, increased in breast reduction surgeries is also under the surface of it, and that podcast episode didn't mention as much, at least by this person's report, and it's often not talked about in this pop culture conversation, is that insurance just wouldn't cover it,
Mm.
and had this view, especially when the beauty standard was that, like, having a large chest is a good thing, and in general in medicine, not taking women's pain seriously, which is a reason that a lot of people who get breast reductions is why they do it. They mentioned that, I know, in the episode, but that there is certainly a population that might be doing it for aesthetics, but, like, these complex social conversations that we have online and how they impact us and what kind of kaleidoscopic side of it that we see, uh, is is fascinating, and we
One
don't
thing
know
that
what we absorb, especially with the algorithm being so specific. Like, you're like, "I know hair, whatever, transplants are a big thing." I was not aware of that. I was unaware of
oh
that.
yeah. I imagine we're probably pitched different content.
Probably.
I'm also on hip transplant TikTok and have no explanation for
I
that.
we're the triangle of, like, there's some Venn diagram happening here.
The podcast did talk about how like it's deemed as acceptable to do it for medical reasons and like people are like questioned more if it's for cosmetic reasons and even for other things like people will lie and say like, oh, I got a rhinoplasty because of my deviated septum and they happen to just make these cosmetic changes, but that's not the real reason why I got it. So I notice how the motivation for the surgery is flavored with where you're trying to get out of it, health or cosmetic reasons. And the same applies to like the motivation for your vulnerability online too. I think like, is it for the purpose of normalizing for other people, or I've also noticed this a little bit. Like people are are vulnerable just because they think that like, oh, authenticity will get me attention. So let me just like dump everything that you don't need to know about my life, and it's kind of like, whoa, that got like really personal really fast. And then I'm like, can be curious, like, I wonder what this person was, like, hoping to accomplish by, like, sharing this.
The chapter I read in Amelia's book today
Yeah.
literally says, "Consider why they shared that." And Preston, you're just, like, modeling it to
Oh, yeah.
perfection.
It makes me think of the comments of, like, people will be like, "Remember when we had secrets?" And I'm kinda like, "Yeah, I do."
And it's interesting to think about, like, okay, if we were with a client or a patient and that degree of vulnerability is poured out, we would wonder
Mhm,
and get curious in, a neutral way. But like, what's the function of this degree of sharing? Like, what is happening in this relationship with the screen and this anonymous audience, right? Like,
mhm,
there's so many reasons why we might choose to share something online. It's really complicated. And I think, one of the ways just to tune in with ourselves is to check in about that intention. Like, what does it feel like when I receive 50 comments about how brave and strong I am when perhaps my own parents won't say that to me? Maybe there's a clue, right? Or what does it feel like to be notable or needed in a community if that's something I don't experience in my workplace? Right. And it's not to say that these things are bad excuses, it's just information. And perhaps that belonging is really truly needed. I don't want to say it's a bad thing to get your needs for validation met on the internet because it's so much more complicated than that. But I think the danger is when we start to feel like we owe the internet our vulnerability, or when the motivations get so confused. And I mean, we've seen this with like family vloggers, right? It gets so tangled when your livelihood is mixed in with giving the public access to your personal life that the realm of personal and public, the boundaries dissolve between
Yeah.
them, right?
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. No, it's
I can't imagine
fascinating.
crying as a kid and having my mom with a camera in my face.
Yeah, it's definitely I mean, Preston knows this. Obviously, he had to deal with my, like, conniptions about this, but even when we started the podcast, I took some convincing just because, like, the arena you guys are in, I think, is so important, and you both know that, and I've said it as much to both of you. And the ethical gray area of sharing part of yourself online, or at what point do you have enough expertise to be a therapist online? At what point do you like, the anxiety around that, which I think is fair and has a lot of valid parts of it, but also letting that, for me at least up until this podcast, kind of be the louder thing than the also equally true, like, to hold it in both hands part that there's not enough access to mental health care. That, we have a lot of access and that information that's accurate is a scarce resource, especially information that's accurate that can be communicated in a way that makes people stay to listen to it. Um, and so I think what both of you are doing is really important, and it's because I know that it's possible from both of you. Amelia doesn't know this. Preston kinda knows this 'cause I've said this before. I think that was part of why I was like, "I can do this podcast because 'cause I've seen people do it in a way that I think is helping. Um, so I appreciate both your vulnerability and your also continued effort for both of you, even though
You're
doing
welcome.
this podcast scares the shit out of me. Preston, not you. Just kidding.
I'm on a strict diet of 1 compliment a day from Margaret,
Yeah,
and
it's fasting.
we're, like, blowing way over that
Where's the
right now.
motivation? Yeah, I'm trying trying to keep your motivation internal.
I think you're touching on something so important though, because therapists, doctors, like regulated health professionals are in such a weird space on social media, right? Like the wellness sphere is not defined by people who are beholden to a regulatory body, right?
There's this, like, large voice of wellness culture that's regulated by nothing, and then there's people who are actually in the field and maybe have had a lot of schooling and all these things and that tension.
Right. So I think the culture of how health and wellness information is shared on social media is so defined by folks who know how to hold attention because that's what the algorithm encourages, right? So, I mean, a perfect example, if I can think of every time I do a live on TikTok, I inevitably get a question about like I've experienced, this kind of trauma. This is my diagnosis. What art project can I do? And
You don't
I
have someone to
can't
just
tell
cure that?
you.
There's not just
Yeah.
you don't have, like, a paper mache thing that'll just fix me? Amelia,
Ah,
damn it, I
I
thought
mean,
that
I
was
You
do
have
have
a
some paper
Unsatisfying.
mache things,
like a
but
flow chart. It's like
Sorry.
it's like, okay.
we joke about
Um,
paper mache, but that's a very powerful medium.
yeah, listen, I went to art therapy after I started following you, I told you this, and it was great. She did leave the
My
practice,
deepest
though.
honor.
Um, but yeah,
But
so
like what
people ask
happens,
you for
yeah,
yeah,
people ask because 10 other influencers will say, do this project, do this journaling prompt, take this supplement. And it feels really good and important to be a person on the internet who says, so I am a psychotherapist, but you're not my client. So it's super unethical and impossible for me to say what you should do without context, also without the consent, without the privacy. And also just there's no one size fits all solution. Maybe this is us coming full circle, but it's it's challenging to be someone who
just period. It's
has
challenging to be
it's
someone,
challenging to
period.
be some
Yeah,
Which I
but
agree with.
the right answer, the truest answer is often unsatisfying, and people hate that.
Yeah.
I hate it.
right,
Like
right.
I'm the expert, and like my best answer is often it depends.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like I hate to hear that, But if you can just be like the reason why you're sad is actually your magnesium levels and the like you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow, what a tidy nice answer. Like let me take that off the shelf and I can ingest it. And what's funny is like these neat answers capture attention well. The true answers are unsatisfying and frustrating, and the experts understand that. And so I think I guess I'm reflecting out loud to you guys. One way I think I've been able to like remain interesting or capture attention is by taking the audience through the journey of the nuance. So I'll be like, here's the question, like, is my SSRI going to make my life better? Well, it depends. And like it's frustrating, but here's why. And so now we can talk about all the social things that are contributing to depression, and then also like why it might help or why it might not. But like the the contingent part, or the part that's interesting, is each little stop we make along the way on our journey to understand, not dangling this solution, dangling like the carrot at the end and saying
The
like you just
pie
have to
at the end of
hold
the
on, you just
race.
have to wait for this unsatisfying carrot at the end, but kind of like making it like little bite-sized adventures, I
Mhm.
guess.
Mhm. Yeah.
Which is so much more interesting. I mean, I get that we've all become so used to the way capitalism has digested conversations about health and wellness to being like
12 sessions, you're
problem,
done.
solution,
Yeah.
right? But it's really lovely to reclaim the storytelling and like the art and beauty of going through each of those stops and getting to know for ourselves or through the lens of someone who's got a master's degree or more like what the nuance contains. There's so much richness there, and I think like leaning into that richness is perhaps the way to survive as a content creator when you can't just tell people this thing will solve this problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem with that is it takes effort, it takes planning, and it takes a really strong understanding of the thing that you're discussing. There are there are some topics where like I feel like I can go through that nuance with the audience, others where I'm just like I won't make a video on it because I just don't think I have the expertise, because to
Mhm.
have that good nuance and to take someone on that journey, you have to have a really strong understanding. So like, for example, I don't really make videos on depression very often, especially because I like to talk about like neuroscience of things, because it's just so complicated. And like I don't know how I can like make this digestible, because like I have trouble understanding depression. And so like other things that may have like more neat answers I'll do, but then I won't. I guess that's the other point, is like selecting what can be condensed into content and what can't be condensed into content. And I won't take on these like super complex topics rather than do them an injustice by attempting to make them palatable and then almost causing more damage.
Oh, but it's so challenging because so many people will. People
Yeah.
without that
Yeah.
breadth of understanding will approach a topic without perhaps being prepared to do it justice. And then the content about said issue is created by someone with perhaps a less thorough or useful understanding.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You either die with nuance or you start selling a supplement. That's to how it goes.
Yeah.
Um, I think the other thing I think about with this, and part of the non-anxiety part of me that doesn't lean into the online, like, I'm a clinician, but part of it is because it came out of intern year, me wanting to express creativity and artsiness and lifestyle-y things that I thought were fun that I didn't talk about as a doctor. But that is there something I worry about is, like, I don't know who's watching this. So there's, like, is the information correct for them? Because it's like when we talk about, like, personality traits, like, if you are someone who's super anxious, maybe we need to work on the things you're avoiding. But if you're someone who has struggles with self-compassion and you force yourself to be rigidly adherent to everything all the time, you don't need the advice to be more, like, disciplined or what. I would never say it that way anyway, but you know what I mean? Like, where you are is so important to what direction I would point you in. But the other thing outside of the context of that is that there is this history of hierarchy in the mental health professions that if I say I'm a psychiatrist at bada bada bada, right? Like, can someone pick that up with autonomy? Like, can they pick it up and look at it the way the validity it should or shouldn't have? And rather than, or are they gonna see they're a psychiatrist at whatever, I'm gonna just automatically take this in. And that like the kind of automatic assumption there. And that's part of why I write about things that are tangentially related to mental health on TikTok, as Amelia knows. But it's very much offered as like, I'm just a person in the world. Here are some ideas, but they're often most reflective of like they're a metabolized version of whatever I'm learning in psychiatry residency often. It's like what I'm writing about is what's on my mind. But this question, and I wonder how you guys think about this, is like, can people like, do you worry about that? That people are just gonna take it because you're someone who has academic or whatever, has power in society, and they're just gonna automatically trust you. I know often people don't trust us
Mm.
now, but which like fair. But
So I think what
yeah,
you're describing is the argument of authority.
I'm describing that people are going to give you authority automatically based on your role and based on where you sit in society. And
Mhm.
therefore they may take in I worry about this with my patients in real life, in clinic too, that the force of the position of the hierarchy that the context you're located in sometimes can give you a violence that you're not aware of, even if you're not trying to do
Mhm.
that, because people think that they should not say no, they shouldn't speak up to you, depending on their experience of authority and power and how long they've been on a wait list
Yeah.
to
So
talk to
so
you.
Oof, the
even if
wait
you're
list
trying
is
to
so
say,
real too.
listen to me with scrutiny and like evaluate this with your own autonomy, like you said, or with logic, they may just see your credentials and that's enough.
Mhm. I
I
mean, the
think,
people are in pain, right?
yeah, I think you have a I think we live on a spectrum, all three of us,
Mhm,
and we're even on kind of like one end of it. So I think Margaret's
mhm.
on the furthest away, which is I'm an anonymous person. I don't even show my face. I'm just a girl. It seems to be like your approach, who just has some words and some thoughts about things. I'm pretty open that I'm a psychiatrist or a psychiatry resident, but I purposely don't say like I'm Preston, the psych MD. Like I don't want people to be coming to my page already thinking about like how credible I am or all these things. And so when I do talk about mental health, I hope that like the way my dialogue or like my didactic approach is enough to capture attention and also have enough reason behind it that that's what gives me like the credibility and I'm not trying to go out in front of it. And then I think there's like Amelia is like one like little step ahead of that, which is like art therapy is in your name. And so that expands the title a little bit even more. But then there's people like way out there that are like the you could say like the psych guru dot five or something. And then like their whole page is like starts out with like, like that YouTube accent, like, hey guys, like I'm so and so, the psych guru MD, 5 things you didn't know that could be affecting your
Here's
cholesterol
what
or something.
psychiatrists
Bash the
don't
like and
want you to
subscribe
know.
button.
Yeah. Don't yeah.
5 things I would never do, and then they point and they dance to "Say So" by Doja Cat.
Yeah, exactly. So we all kind of like live on this spectrum of like identity and authority. What do you think about that? And I don't
She's like,
know.
"I'm gonna
I
kill
guess I
you."
found more comfortable with like I'm not gonna hide who I am, but I'm also not gonna try to advertise it. I
Mhm,
guess I guess
mhm.
that's where Preston landed.
I guess where I land is people don't know that art therapy is a real thing. So I
That's
feel
true.
like when it comes to like authority and hierarchy, I'm in this weird balancing act because it's not really well known that to be an art therapist in Canada and the US, you need a master's degree. You need to belong to the
Mhm.
Canadian or American Art Therapy Association. It is training akin to becoming a counselor or a psychotherapist. So I feel like I kind of come from this defensive stance very often of wanting people to understand, like, no, 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 I'm a real clinician. I'm not the person who brings arts and crafts. I can. I'm good at that. And I have a clinical set of experience, or I have a set of experiences that are really valid, and my perspective is informed by the education I have. That's one side. And the other side of that, coming back to this conversation about what it means to be client centered, is things like, I'm not going to interpret your artwork for you. I'm not going to necessarily give you a specific art project to do. I mean, that's something that people wouldn't see if they were familiar with the kinds of things I post online. But in a one on one client relationship, I'm really hesitant to give someone a step by step process because it's so much more empowering for them to design it themselves. And I mean, I think it's also the book speaks to that, right? I feel hesitant to step into the role of expert. It's a funny place to be. I have expertise personally, professionally, and I am not the expert of anybody. Holding that is hard.
And there's this question of the larger health system of, does it matter that we protect our patients from snake oil salesmen? Like, where is our I don't mean this in a bad way. I feel like I have a background in theology and ethics, so I speak this way, but like, at what point do we say, maybe I need to speak with less nuance in a way that is more palatable
Mm,
to protect against something? I mean, this sounds like I don't think any single person has that responsibility, but I think there's been a lot of hesitancy, especially in research and academics, to I think part of it's anxiety and not knowing about the online space, but, like, how do you engage the people who you're trying to help, and then how do you be in the public forum? Um,
Nuance and digestibility of content are often anti-correlated, unfortunately.
right, but
So
that's what I'm
so
saying
there
is, like, there's
but there exists this, like, inflection point, I think.
right, but so there's, like, an almost, like, a looking reality in the face and saying, "Here's what's actually happening, though. Sure, in a world, I would love to be a purist and only speak to the most nuanced thing that I know." But none of us do that every day. None of us in our 20-minute, like, precedent, our 20-minute med check visits, I'm not, like, actually going into, like, "And here's all the nuance of an SSRI that we do know or don't know, and maybe some people think we know it." That there's these ethical you have to weigh like, ethics is truly weighing 2 goods and picking which one in the
mm,
context is important to your values and to the values you wanna help propagate in society. And so, sometimes being online means, like, making something catchy and easier to digest, and maybe leaning in some way to part of something you don't like, which is being like, "Here's 5 ways that this works." Like, how much have people gotten from that? Probably a lot. Probably a lot.
right. Like I think about like if I was my most ethical self and felt or I could exist on that binary and do it
Ethical
perfectly,
self on a
every
Friday.
video every video would start with the disclaimer of the fact that while I'm an art therapist, this video doesn't constitute art therapy because it's not a clinical relationship. Like I could talk for 2 hours about like the risks or,
Now that the
I can't do an
preamble's
intake.
done, yeah.
Yeah. And then, but, instead, I'm also thinking about like, okay, I have 2 seconds realistically to tell someone what they're going to get from this video. More good is done by saying, here's an art process about this kind of thing. And then also having a disclaimer somewhere else for people to find. But it's imperfect, right? I do feel uneasy about the fact that say sometimes people comment like, oh, I went and did art therapy by myself this week, or I took your art therapy prompts and did art therapy with myself. And it's not as useful for me to get kind of on my high horse and remind people like, oh, that's actually not art therapy because whatever. I don't want to say whatever because it is really important to me. And I think I could get caught in the red tape and the gatekeeping so much so that nothing went online and these ideas didn't make it out into the world.
Right.
And now we're
which
back to square one.
which is where I was before we started the podcast, and Preston forced my hand. Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about this on and on. I think it's such a fascinating conversation. Maybe a place for us to end is what your hopes are for your, maybe in like a sentence, which I know is awful and horrible and very 2-second attention span of me. Where you hope your relationship a year from now with your screens and online presence, um, how you hope it's changed in the past year, or how you
Scroll to minute 49 to hear the answer.
no, no, no.
No, I'm just
Oh yeah,
joking.
I
You
feel like
you won't believe what Amelia says about her relationship with
you'll
the
find it
internet.
behind the paywall after
Stick
this.
around for answer number 3. Um, no, it's a beautiful question. What do I hope my relationship with social media looks like in a year?
Yeah, the trajectory it's gone in.
I mean, what is so interesting about my own journey is that I haven't fixed my relationship with social media, right? And if I can be transparent and vulnerable, the year of or the 2 years of writing the book, I was very kind of immersed in the ideas and still doing it imperfectly. Still had, more screen time than I was comfortable with. And then the process of completing the book and the burnout of that layered in with just, the things life threw at me this year. I was evacuated for wildfires this summer and took stress leave at one point. Like it's been a challenging year and my screen time has never been higher. I've been grappling with promoting a book about tending to your relationship with social media when frankly my relationship with social media has never been worse, which feels so weird, but also perfect because the point isn't to find the habit or the hack that works forever.
Or for you to be the paragon at all times.
Right.
Yes. Oh my gosh, the pressure of that. What I do notice is
You are my
different is
guru
that
though. So sorry, but you're my guru. You start a cult,
I'll
I'm
take it.
there, Amelia.
But what is different than say how I was in my relationship with social media 5 years ago is that I think I feel a lot less shame. I feel less like I've let myself down even though I might have had like 5 hours of screen time yesterday. It's often more, right? The how I talk to myself is the piece that's different. So my hope, I guess, kind of moving out of this challenging era of life, like a year from now, I hope to continue with that thread of self-compassion and empathy and start to have some of the bandwidth to to turn to my offline habits, to build my attention span. Like I think I'm on day 2 of writing in the morning before looking at a screen. I will restart that process over and over again. Um, but I hope a year from now, I'm still in conversation with myself.
Hmm. I think
Maybe
that's
that's all I want to
beautiful.
say. I hope a year from
Yeah.
now, I'm still in conversation
I
with
mean,
myself.
that conversation probably never ends. So we can just we can hope it takes
And this
corners that
this
we want it
episode will
to, and then the subjects will meander. But
Yeah. No, I think that's a beautiful answer, and I think it's very, as is apt for any good therapist or therapy, process-based.
I thought it was good content.
He's gonna hit you with a like and
I thought it
repost.
came from a good content creator.
Okay, well, Amelia, it's been lovely to have you on. I don't know if you wanna say where people can find you online, find your book, or where to connect with you or other offerings that you'd like to kinda give people a chance to connect with you besides here if this is the first time they're meeting you in the internet.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your
I'm
home
on
address?
Preston.
Sorry.
my social security number.
Actually, don't.
He's like, "I'm outside your house right now with my"
You won't find me. I'm deep in the woods of British Columbia.
Do not
But
challenge him like that.
uh, my book is The Art of Thriving Online, and you can find it wherever you buy books. Margaret's holding it up. It's also available in audio and ebook formats, depending on how you like to consume information. We really worked hard to make sure the audio version didn't seem like a lesser version. So a lot of the prompts have been adapted to be about
Cool.
speaking and sound, which I feel really proud of. But you can find that all the places you can normally find books. And if you want to just like hang out together on the internet, I'm Art Therapy IRL on Instagram and TikTok. And yeah, I often post videos of art projects that may or may not be helpful to you,
Mhm.
depending on
Oh,
what's going on in your life. But if you're curious about art therapy, that's where you can find me.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Preston, I think it's your time to read the part
Okay,
that I
it's
never
it's
read.
it's that time.
It's that
So,
time.
Amelia, you get to hang out for our favorite part of the show, which is when we do the outro. Thank you so much for listening. Let us know what you thought of the show and how you like this style of episode. I really enjoy bringing on these experts to talk about some of their latest works and also these approaches of therapy from a different perspective, because there are a million ways that you can dice a carrot, and I always like to hear new ways,
Wait, wait, wait.
whether it's
Dice
the medium
carrots.
of art or paper mache. So come chat with us, share your thoughts at the Human Podcast family on IG and TikTok at Human Content Pods, or you can contact the team directly at howtobepatientpod.com. Shout out to all the listeners leaving all the kind feedback and the awesome reviews. And anyone who's sending in your art projects after this, you can either send it to us or Art Therapy in RL.
You know I
If you
won't
send it
judge
to
you.
me,
My name
I
is Bad
will
Art
put
every
it on
day,
my
so-
fridge. I'm not kidding. I do want to see your art projects. If
Honestly,
you want to
it's like a
watch
statue
the
of
Really
you.
bad.
if you want to watch the videos on YouTube, they'll be on my channel at It's Presro. And Bad Art Every Day doesn't have a YouTube channel yet, but I'll probably cajole her into making one. Thanks again for listening. We're your hosts, Preston Roche and Margaret Duncan. Our executive producers are me, Preston Roche, and Margaret Duncan, Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Jason Portizo. Our music is by Omer Benz-V. Check out our show notes to see the references and resources we use to discuss in this episode. To learn more about our program disclaimer and ethics policy, submission verification and licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to our website, howtobepatientpod.com, or reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. How to Be Patient is a human content production.
How to be patient.
Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.